Our next presenters are from Sweden. They are Professor Annika Norlund Shaswar and Professor Emerita Åsa Wedin from Dalarna University. And a huge welcome to you. And please go ahead, Annika and Åsa.
Thank you. Yes, so this presentation is about letter learning in basic literacy education for adult migrants who are learning Swedish. So the outline of the presentation is this. We're going to talk very shortly about what Swedish for Immigrants is and our research project. And then we will talk about principles for writing and challenges in Swedish literacy and something about pronunciation and basic literacy teaching. So first, Swedish for Immigrants is an introductory program in Swedish as a second language up to level B1, B2, and it is financed through municipalities and free of charge for the students. There are 3 study paths in order to individualize the education and 4 different courses. And in this presentation, we will talk about mainly study path 1, where there are learners with very little education from their earlier lives. So the goals of this education is functional language learning, and it is related to students' communicative needs for work, social life, and further studies. And we have seen in our research that engagement is a very important factor for learning in this context. And the learners need to learn oral and literacies, and these need to be learned in relation to each other. And teaching needs to be based on their earlier knowledge, experiences, including their earlier language skills. And our project, which this presentation is based within, we can say, was called Basic Literacy Education in Swedish for Immigrants. And the aim was to explore and develop teaching in Swedish for Immigrants, study path 1, that supports second language development and particularly basic literacy. It was a 3-year project financed from 2020 to 2022 by the Swedish School Research Council. The methodology was a combination of linguistic ethnography and action research, and there were 4 participant schools, Swedish for Immigrant schools, and we were 4 researchers and 1 PhD student. So it was Åsa Wedin, me, and Jenny Rosén, Birgitta Ljung Egeland, and Pernilla Olsson from Karlstad University.
Yes, when we look at written language, there are different principles for written language all over the world. We have word-based principles, syllable-based principles, and sound-based principles. Word-based principles, that is mainly Chinese, where the basic principle is that one word is represented by one sign. Syllable-based principles are very easy to learn, but they are only suitable for a few languages in the world. And sound-based principle, that is the principle we use for the Nordic countries, and English, that is the Latin script. And the basic principle there is that one sound should represent or match one letter. In newly transcribed languages such as Somali and Finnish, there is quite a good match between one sound and one letter. When we have older transcripts such as English, the match is not very good. I think you have all exercised English, and you know that actually that is quite a big difference between spoken and written English. Swedish is somewhere in between. Written Swedish matches oral Swedish quite well, but there are certain important differences which may be difficult for students. You may change. A teacher who teaches basic literacy need to know the basic principles for writing Swedish and the difficulties. And some of the main difficulties for second language learners who learn to read and write for the first time in Swedish are consonant sounds, vowel sounds, assimilations, and prosody. So this is something, there are a few aspects that the teachers need to consider. And if we go to consonants, we have the two Swedish sounds h and sh, which do not have a letter. They don't match a letter, but instead the spelling is very irregular. And of course, that is a difficulty for students. We also have the supradentals, d, t, n, sh, and r. And they are, for most second language learners, difficult to hear and difficult to say. And this makes them also difficult to read and understand. And then in Swedish, we have many consonant clusters. We can have words like kvast, skaft, skruvdragare, and such consonant clusters are, for most second language learners, very difficult to hear. And if they don't hear them, and they also have difficulty in pronouncing them, and then they also have difficulty in learning how to read and write them. And then there are also some differences in the spelling of Swedish when you compare to other languages, which poses a different difficulty for students. We have, for example, the letters C, Q, Z, and X in Swedish. They don't match one sound in Swedish. And instead, we pronounce them in different ways depending on from which language we borrow the word. So this means that students who come from other languages where these letters are pronounced in a certain way, they will get a problem in Swedish, as we don't pronounce and spell them in the same way. So if we sum up some of the more specific challenges in the pronunciation and spelling of Swedish, so prosody is one difficulty. Prosody, this means length and stress and intonation when we talk. And in Swedish, this carries meaning. For example, if you say stegen or stegen, these are two different words. But for other speakers of other languages, it may be very difficult to hear the difference between stegen and stegen. We have words like hal, hall, tal, tall, which, and in those words, the length of the vowel or the length of the consonant means that the word meaning differs. And this is difficult for most learners of Swedish as a second language. And some of the sounds are very long. So thus prosody is difficult to hear and to say in Swedish. And only part of the prosody is represented in writing. So this poses a difficulty for all learners of second language learners of Swedish. When we come to the vowels, we have 18 different vowel sounds in Swedish and some allophones. Most languages in the world, they have 3 or 5 vowels. So the number of vowels in Swedish is difficult. And then we also have the front rounded vowels like y and ö. They are difficult for many second language learners to hear, to say, and of course then to read and write. And we also have the in-rounded u vowel, which is very difficult for most of the learners. When we think of vowels, we think that it's important that teachers exercise length physically, that they exaggerate, and that they make students answer in call and response choirs, because they need to put a lot of effort in pronunciation of the vowels to understand the reading and writing of vowels in Swedish. And there are also differences between pronunciation and spelling, that is between oral and written language, that the teacher needs to consider. And a teacher who teaches adults who didn't know how to read and write, or at least they didn't know the Latin letters, then the teacher needs to present letters. And then teacher needs to consider in what order the letters should be presented. For example, we suggest that teachers start with the letters that the student already know, that the teacher actually investigates what letters do this student know. And then that they start with the letters in the student's name, because actually reading and writing one's own name is most important. So if some students don't learn anymore, they should at least learn how to read and write their own name. Then we suggest that they start with easy letters, and these are letters that are common in Swedish, that are easy to pronounce and easy to hear. And we suggest that they leave the letters that are more difficult for a later time, when the students have already learned some of the basic letters. And more difficult letters are letters that are difficult to hear. For example, differences between PB, TD, well, I can't pronounce it in English, because actually English is a very bad language for pronouncing letters. Difficult letters are also those that have different pronunciation than from other languages. So we have some letters in Swedish that we pronounce in another way than most other languages. And also the letters that are written under or below the line are usually a difficulty for adult students who are not used to write. And also letters that have similar shapes and that are different in handwriting and in print. And we also suggest that teachers follow the development of letter understanding among individual students to give them the best teaching. Yeah, over to you, Annika.
Yes, and now something about the connections between pronunciation and basic literacy teaching. Or when you look at research, and we also have seen in our research that it's necessary to start with pronunciation teaching very early on in teaching, in order for learners not to learn the wrong pronunciation of sounds and procedures. But in basic literacy education, there are some things that need to be considered, since you can't do like in other courses. Often people or teachers base their pronunciation teaching on texts. So that you, for example, underline some words in order to mark that these words are stressed in a sentence. But that's difficult to do if you have learners who are on a basic level in their literacy education, in their basic literacy education, because then there is too much focus on the reading, means that they don't have very much focus or can't really focus on the pronunciation. For that reason, it's a good way of teaching if you sometimes only focus on pronunciation, so you don't have any writing on the blackboard or whiteboard at all. Just learners listen to teacher and repeating after the teacher. And also that also is a good way of learning the differences between pronunciation and writing, so that they listen and hear that some sounds are different from when how they're written. And we have seen that when teaching is done that way, sometimes the learners themselves realize that, okay, this word is spelled D-E-T, but you say de, dom. So yeah, and that sort of teaching where students themselves realize things is very good for learning as well. And of course, you need to have for pronunciation teaching as well as for all other sorts of teaching. You need to have a very safe and open atmosphere, because if you're going to learn these words, these sounds, and these long so the different sounds, and you might feel a bit awkward or uncomfortable as an adult learner. So it's important that the classroom is, you feel that it's safe, and everyone can try and pronounce words that are very difficult maybe to pronounce, like for example the vowels E. And also that it might be a good idea also for the teacher to try and pronounce some of the words, sounds, and use prosody from learners' languages, and try and pronounce something, and learners can sort of see that, oh, the teacher also pronounces in my language. It sounds very funny, so you can laugh together, and the atmosphere is a bit more open. Yeah. We have also been involved in development project where song was used in pronunciation teaching, and that is might also be a good way of learning prosody. If you have song texts where you have phrases that are used also in spoken languages, you have vocabulary that is used in spoken language, and you have sort of ways of expressing and prosody that also is correct in relation to spoken language. And that also is a way of having making atmosphere more open, and so on. So yeah, that's our presentation.